Hello and welcome to another edition of Iain Dale All Talk. I'm Iain Dale. This is, of course, the podcast that seeks to get behind the headlines and get to know people in the world of politics and the media just a little bit better. Well, today we're going to talk to a Conservative politician. She's been a Member of Parliament since the 2017 election for Chichester. Of course, that's a constituency that used to be represented by Andrew Tyree for many years. Quite a titanic parliamentary figure, I think, in many ways. He's now in the House of Lords. She's now Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Apprenticeships and Skills at the Department of Education. And it's Gillian Keegan. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Iain. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're a relatively newbie on the political stage in many ways, and I don't know whether that accounts for the fact that you tend to be slightly more normal than some politicians that I interview, where you kind of know that you're going to get an answer with you, and it's going to be quite entertaining rather than trot out the usual sound bites. Is that deliberate, or is that just you?
God, I now feel the pressure to come up with something. Well, I am normal. I think that's the thing. I am normal, and I have been normal for most of my years. And, I'm 52 now. I've been a politician for 3 years, and I think, all my other experiences are just normal experiences, where I grew up. Everything's normal about me. So, yeah, I'm glad I remain normal because that's kind of what I am. Do you fear that you might not, though, at some point? If you want to keep climbing what Disraeli called the greasy pole, you have to be more compliant. You have to come out with the phrases that you're told by your spin doctors more. No, I don't fear that. And, with my family, I don't think there's any chance that I will be able to, change the way I am. Every time I go back to a family party, it's like having a huge focus group. My family's massive and they've all got lots of opinions. So, no, I don't fear that. And, you can decide how you want to express things. I always support the party pretty much. I do support a lot of the policies, and I say so, but I just probably say it in a way that's just more normal, I guess. I think about it. I think about policy, I think about what it means to people, and I try to express it in a way that people would understand it. Let's look at where you came from, because I think that's played a big role in your politics. You come from Merseyside, you grew up in Knowsley, and how did that upbringing affect your politics? Well, it didn't really affect my politics in a way when I was younger, because everybody was Labour, so I didn't really think about it. I suppose if I had thought about it, I'd have thought I'd probably be Labour. And the whole place, if you go to Highton, where I grew up, to get to school, you'd walk past every sort of name of every Labour politician. There's statues of them. So, it's very much a Labour place. My granddad was a miner. He was very much a Labour man. All my family were Labour supporters. And it's Harold Wilson's constituency, wasn't it? It was, yeah. And and Harold Wilson, the big long road at the end of my parents' road is Wilson Road, and behind my nan's house. So it's it is very much a Labour place, and I would imagine it's probably the last place in the country that would turn Conservative. So that was just normal, really. And I didn't have strong political views until I started work, and I started work as an apprentice, and it was there that I started to question some of the dogma that I'd been brought up with, some of the sort of settled status, which is, Labour was the right answer. And I started to question that when I got into the workplace. What was it about the workplace that made you question it? It was the 1980s. It was I was apprenticed in a car in Liverpool, and there was a lot of union behaviour. So there's a lot of change going on in the world. There was a lot of globalization. There was a lot of change in how cars, the just-in-time was being introduced. There was a lot of change in the operating processes, and it meant you had to adapt some of the working practices. And effectively, what was happening is, there was big rows basically between the unions and the managers about how that was going to be done. And so there was a lot of strike action, And because I was going to work, I was seeing this. And I was also studying at the same time, learning all about globalization, learning all about what was happening in the world. And I thought these people are acting as though there's not another place in the world that you can make a car part. And there is. And actually, if they carry on like this, we're going to end up with this car factory closing, which, of course, is where it all ended up, sadly, quite a few years later.
Now, you are the first apprenticeships minister to have been an apprentice yourself. How does that help you in your current ministerial job?
Well, first of all, it means that, I'm truly passionate about apprenticeships, and not only my own experience, which, it was a kind of lifesaver and a life changer for me. Leaving a comprehensive school in Knowsley in the 80s, let's just say it wasn't there wasn't that many opportunities for me and many of my school friends. So an apprenticeship was really the golden ticket. So it really did change my life, and the high quality of the training that I got, all those years. I actually spent 7 years working in the car factory, but all those years of learning about how the whole business worked, going to college, then to university 1 day a week, was just a fantastic way to build my confidence, to build my knowledge, to build strong foundations, which really saw me through the rest of my business career, which lasted for nearly 30 years. But so I'm really passionate about them, but I also think they're a fantastic way for most people to learn about careers, about businesses, about opportunities, and to really, the work experience element of an apprenticeship is fantastic, but you're also getting the structure and the discipline of studying as well. So I actually truly believe in them, and because I did one, and because I've also trained and recruited lots of apprentices, I've just seen time and time again how effective they are. So I think that experience makes me really passionate about them. And one of the very first meetings I had was when there was a debate about whether to take the degree out of degree apprenticeships. And it was one of the first meetings, and I sat there and said, you do know you're talking to the only degree apprentice in the House of Commons. This is so not going to happen on my watch, and let me tell you why. And so I think, having that experience, it's not an academic debate with me. It's a real, it's a debate that I really do feel it. I really do, and I'm very passionate about them. And I honestly think that apprenticeships are the answer to most questions, actually, when it comes to how to get on in the workplace, how to retrain, how to reskill, how to get the skills you need if the world changes around you. I think apprenticeships are just a brilliant way to do it.
When you were given the job by Boris Johnson, did he know of your background in this, or was it just by chance?
I actually pitched for it, if I'm honest. So they knew a bit about my background.
You astonish me.
They knew a bit about where I was from, and the fact I was kind of working class background, and I'd had a long business career. I suppose they probably were thinking about me in maybe in some sort of business kind of role. But when I sat down and sort of said, look, if it was me making this decision, I would put me in the role as Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills. I think it's super important. I think I'm a passionate believer. I'm a great advocate, and I am it. I am the living, breathing, walking, talking, apprentice. And I really do think that they're a great way to provide opportunity to level up agenda that we talk about. I think they're a really pragmatic, practical way to go about doing it. And so they luckily they listened to me, because it's just my dream job, really. It really is. It's such a privilege to be able to do it, and it's such a privilege to be able to do it at this time when we're really focused on the skills agenda and levelling up and how to spread, that understanding that we have talent everywhere, but opportunity isn't equally spread, I think is something that I can bring to life.
Isn't there a dilemma here, though? Because it is a job that people often get and then move on quite quickly, move up the political ladder. Matt Hancock, I remember, had the job a few years ago. If you're in your dream job, it's quite difficult to accept an offer to move in a reshuffle, I guess. But on the other hand, you have to get experience all over government if you are to, as I said before, climb up the greasy pole.
Well, that's true to some extent, but I've only been an MP for 3.5 years, and I haven't even been a minister for a year yet. In fact, it's our year's anniversary for many of us this weekend. So I think we can get quite a lot done in the next few years. So, I think we can achieve a lot, and you still then can get other experience afterwards. I'm in the right time at the right place. We've got a skills white paper, we've got a skills bill which is going to go through, and we've got a lot of fundamental changes to revolutionise our technical education in this country. And I think we could do a lot in the next few years to put. There's quite a lot been done already, so we can put some solid foundations in place. There's a couple of years of hard work to do.
How much input do you, as a junior minister, get into the white paper, into the bill? Is it largely something that was almost there before you arrived? How much is it influenced by whoever's Secretary of State at the time, or can you really have a huge amount of influence as a parliamentary under Secretary of State?
There's a lot of work that's been going on for many years. It started off with the Sainsbury Review, and then there was the Auger Review, and then there was a lot of work being going on about reforming our apprenticeship system, about designing new technical qualifications which are T-level. So all of that work had been done by many people, previous Secretary of States under previous Prime Ministers. So there's great sort of foundations, and I think that some of the keys to the difference of why is this going to work now. I don't think there's been anybody. I was reading Ken Clarke's autobiography the other day, actually, and when he was Education Secretary, he was saying almost the same things. I nearly dropped the book. I thought, God, people have been trying to turn those words into action, into really making that change for many years. But timing's everything, and I think we're in this position now where we've built up our school system and changed our school standards. We've revolutionised our higher education, the amount of people who go to university, the access to university, the quality of our offer. We've got world-class universities. What we haven't done is build up our technical education and all of those other routes into the workplace. And I think the timing is right. So I do get some influence. I mean, there's a lot of it that is just common sense, to be honest, and it's more about implementation than policy. I think there's a lot of people that have had the same idea for a long time, but it's like, how are we going to do it? And the key thing is how we're going to get the employers to want to do it. And we're building on the foundations of a lot of great work that's gone on with the apprenticeship reform, where the employers have worked very, very closely with the DfE, about 3,000 of them, to really build standards that they want. So we're trying to make sure that education isn't out of step with the needs of the employers. And we're building on some great practice, but it is, it is all to do in front of us in terms of making sure that the other 50% get a fantastic range of options to go into really great careers.
We all think we can imagine what it's like to be a minister, and you must have thought about it before you were appointed. What surprised you, and what have you come to know in the job that you kind of expected as well? Well,
the funniest thing was the first week. So I was sat there in meetings, and you're sort of saying what you think about policy, and I'm not backwards in coming forwards. I do have views, and I'm happy to articulate them. And pretty much the whole of the week, people were saying that's very helpful, Minister. That sort of writing things down. And I sat there at the weekend after I'd been a minister for a week and thought, I'll get out that old copy of Yes Minister and watch it. And basically, I watched my week on the programme where they were all basically saying, yeah, it's very helpful, Minister. And of course, very helpful, Minister doesn't actually mean that you're really very helpful. So I was just was crying with laughter, and I went back in a couple of weeks later, and I've got a mug now which has got very helpful Minister written on it, and I just kind of hold that up every now and again. It's a very odd world. So in the business world, you are responsible for hiring and firing people, you're responsible for building teams, you're responsible for strategy, you're responsible for implementing strategy. Ultimately, you're accountable for the results. It's a very different sort of setup in this world. So as a minister, you're accountable. You're the public face of accountability. You are held to scrutiny on the policies, whether it's in the House of Commons or whether it's on the media. And yet the organisation that delivers it is a completely separate organisation that, albeit, ministers decide, the whole way that it's set up to deliver and to implement is something that you don't even get to see. And that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable, certainly as a business person, because the other part of it is, how you really measure the outcomes, how you really measure, a deliverable is not a piece of paper called guidance telling somebody else to do something. A deliverable is, what is the real deliverable we're trying to get to? And that's the sort of challenge, that's the difference really in that I found from my sort of nearly 30 years in business and trying to get things done and change things within this role as a civil, with the civil service being the delivery arm and you being the sort of bit that's stuck on top and a great big rubber stamp at times.
Let's talk a bit about your business career. As you say, you were in business for 30 years. Just take us through some of the different roles that you held.
Well, I started off as an apprentice, and it was a brilliant apprenticeship because you went round each bit of the business for 3 to 6 months. So that was everything from finance to production to, all the sort of various roles of distribution, etc. in a car factory. So I really got to understand a lot of how a whole business knits together, and I think that was very important foundation from the very beginning, because not many people get to do that. Not many people get to go round a whole business in a short period of time, so you see how it all works together. It's quite an unusual experience. Another big plus for those rotational apprenticeships. As a result of that, I went on to become a buyer, and there was many different roles, but that's the one they thought I would be good at. It was something I enjoyed. I'm very commercial. I like numbers. I'm also a people person. I like to build relationships, and as it turned out, I realized that I was also quite a good negotiator, or they realized I was. So I ended up as a buyer, and I was buying electronics for cars. I bought plastics, I bought tools, I bought all kinds of different things. As a result of that, I went down the procurement route. So when I left the car factory, I got a job in NatWest Bank, so I became a IT procurement, senior buyer first of all, then an IT procurement manager in the bank, buying PCs, buying ATMs, all the equipment that you see now. We were buying those, and I ended up then buying the chips that you see on the card, developing that new technology, that new digital payments technology. There was a lot of change that's happened in my career, so I've basically just tried to ride the wave of that. That took me to Tokyo for a couple of years, working in Tokyo. I didn't ever live in Tokyo, I just went back and forth, but I worked there for about 2.5 years. And that was really when the banking industry was trying to come up with an answer to how we were going to be able to pay for all this stuff securely, as the internet was developing and mobile phones were developing. So that was brilliant experience, and I became a commercial director, which is effectively when you invest in buying something. So it's not that far from procurement. And then I moved into sales, which is kind of the other side of the table from procurement, and that's pretty much where I ended my career. The last job I had, I was chief marketing officer, which is effectively when you've got the marketing, pricing, strategy, and all of the product and product design and that kind of stuff. So it's always been commercial, it's always been outward facing, it's always been about the numbers, it's always been really accountable. It's happened in many different sectors. I've worked in travel, banking, and the car manufacturing, and it's happened in many different countries. I've always been very international in very international businesses, so it was a fantastic career. I loved it, but I didn't want to spend the next 25 years doing what I'd spent the last 27 years doing, which is where I started, because you do spend a lot of time away from home. You spend a lot of time on a plane. I lived in Madrid for 8 years when my husband was living in the UK. You do sacrifice a lot. You have a great time, but you don't want to spend your whole life doing it.
In many ways, you've had a successful career and then got into politics, which is what a lot of the general public think, well, isn't that how it's supposed to work? But you got into Parliament, at the age of 47, 48?
49.
49. Well, normally, nowadays, if you're not in Parliament by the time you're 40, you're almost written off. It's become a very sort of youth-orientated political system, I think, in all parties. Do you look around you sometimes and think, it'd be much better if some of you lot had had a bit more experience?
Well, I think, first of all, in terms of being written off, I've been written off probably from the very beginning, actually. I've been written off. I was written off at school as never, would never be getting any O-levels, and then got them, and then you get written off a lot from my background. So from that element, it is what it is. I wouldn't have ever thought of it before. I never thought of it even when I was when I first started the journey. I was 46. I never even thought of it. Then someone else suggested it to me, because it just wasn't really part of my DNA. I think in terms of other people, you mentioned right at the beginning about my communication style, the fact I feel confident to communicate. Not necessarily just stick to the lines, as it were. It's actually my experience that gives me that confidence. It's because I can think through, what this policy means, or how somebody may interpret it, or what do people really need to know, or what do we need them to do as a result of what words are going to be uttered out of my mouth. And I think like that, and I think of those things because that's the experience that you gain when you're in all of those different situations, and you're having to, read people, or you're having to negotiate, or you're having to deliver something, or you're having to motivate a team, or you're having to ask them to do things that are really difficult. So that's probably, I think it gives me more confidence to those experiences I can rely on. I can always come up with something that I've seen before or heard before, or I can talk to somebody who I think may know something about it. I think that gives me confidence in being able to be myself really in the role. And I guess, I'd hate to be able to be so reliant just on reading lines that I didn't understand. I think you have to understand it.
So when did you first identify as a Conservative, if I can put it that way?
Actually, my first election, I came out. I actually did feel a bit like that in Knowsley because I was... So I started work at 16. I was watching all this union behaviour. We also had, of course, Liverpool City Council and Derek Hatton giving us, the world according to militant tendency, and their skills, and showing us just how well they could run things according to their ideology. So I also had that experience, which is a fantastic experience to watch because you know exactly what not to do. So the first election, after I was eligible to vote, I was 19. And I voted Conservative, and it was in 1987. So it was Margaret Thatcher, and it was, her third election, I guess. And I just looked around and just thought, all the things she was saying about, what we needed to do as a country, the industrial change we were going to go through, whether we liked it or not. And this is the thing that often people talk, she changed this and she changed the manufacturing, industry and the coal industry. These changes were happening. We had to respond to a lot of globalization, and we had to compete in an increasingly globalized world, which had changed a lot with all sorts of things, but not least containerization. So there was a lot of these things happening, and we had to respond to it as a country. You can't just stick your head in the sand and say, we're not going to change. And I could see what she was saying about, what she was going to do vis-a-vis the unions, etc., was the right answer, because the unions did not have the right answer. They had the wrong answer, and it was self-serving.
And did you tell your friends and family that you'd voted Conservative in that election?
Yeah, I did. And I mean, obviously, they it's funny, they thought it was weird, obviously, but it didn't change what they thought about me. They were like, why would you do that? In a way, they kind of, they didn't dismiss me because they knew I had experience, and I was the only kid in my school to get 10 O-levels, so that had kind of given me some sort of credibility as someone who might know something. So they were kind of curious, but the reality is most of people, my friends, my family, if you ask them why they voted Labour, they'd say because that's what we all do, and that's what everybody does around me, and they're the party that look after the working class, or they'd come out with some sort of high level thoughts about it, but the reality is they didn't think about it very often. They didn't challenge their own political views really at all, and that's just how it was. And I challenged the political views just because I thought this doesn't make sense. What they're saying doesn't make sense, because I'm seeing it in the car factory and it's not going to work. And I can see exactly what's going to happen. These people are not going to be making car parts in Kirby in 10 years' time. I can see that because you can't, because there was, they'll go to Spain or Portugal or somewhere else, which is of course what happens and what happened all over the country.
Now, I've read that it was Justine Greening who encouraged you to become an MP. Is that true?
No, she did, but not. She wasn't the first culprit. The first person who's responsible is Baroness Anne Jenkin, the redoubtable Baroness Anne Jenkin, who I met at the theatre randomly, and we both had somebody we knew in common. The guy she was with, who also worked for. He worked in the Japanese business world, and both my husband and I had both worked in that world, and we knew him. And he introduced us to her, and she said within the 15 minutes, literally,
I can imagine.
Of your champagne, she said, "Have you ever thought of being an MP?" And so I said, "No, quite frankly, that's a random thing, a bizarre thing to think. Who gets up in the morning?" Well, actually now, funnily enough, I know a lot of people who get up in the morning and have got up in the morning for a lot of their life thinking, "I want to be an MP." But in my sphere, in what I've done, I don't know anybody who was like that, who got up in the morning saying, "I want to be an MP," apart from my husband, actually, who did years ago. But it just
because his father was an MP, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, in the 50s. And I actually referred to him in my maiden speech, but I never met his father. He died before I met Michael. But yeah, he's much more similar to my colleagues. He did the whole student politics thing. He wanted to be an MP from a young age. He went along that journey until he was about 36, and then his business career was also taking off, and he had to make a choice at that point. I think when he made a choice, it was 1996. So as a Conservative, I think he was much better off.
That was quite good timing.
Yeah, good timing. But he is very political, and comes from a much more typical sort of background. But I hadn't thought of it, and I certainly hadn't thought of it for me. And she just said, come along and have a chat in the House of Lords, which I went along, and she just made me see, actually, that I could potentially have something to offer, that my journey, my story, my business experience, my beliefs, my style of communicating. In fact, I was a woman. She was actually looking for more women. She just sort of convinced me that perhaps I had something to offer. And then, of course, you have to start the journey, which means you're starting right at the bottom, really. And that's something I think might put a lot of people off, because you've obviously, by that point, you've got, you're flying at the front of the plane. You've got a lot of the corporate baubles around you. And most people wouldn't want to swap that for, walking around, delivering leaflets and trying to start very, at the bottom. And I became a counsellor, first of all, because it's a great way of testing yourself, really, if you want to do the job. And then it was whilst I was a counsellor, I stood in St Helens, and just after I'd stood in St Helens, which is next door to where I come from, I then met Justine at a London Business School party. It was a reunion, and I'd gone to London Business School, and unbeknownst to me, she had as well, and she was kind of the star speaker. And I saw her there and thought, I plucked up the courage actually to go and speak to her, because I just stood as a Conservative candidate in St Helens, and she was brilliant. And she said, come in for a cup of tea, and then she helped me with my speech, my how I appeal to the Conservative selectorate, which is a rather distinct and specific audience, and how you speak Tory, basically, because that wasn't my language. And so I had to come up with how you appeal to the people who pick the Conservative MPs, the candidates, and certainly for a seat that lots of people wanted to go for. It wasn't that competitive to stand in St Helens, south of Wiston, I must say. There wasn't that many people who put their hand up to do that. But yeah, that's where she was really, really helpful.
I remember, I think the first time I met you, you were telling me about standing in St Helens and the reaction of your family, and the fact that I don't think they actually lived in the constituency, but they told you if they had, they wouldn't have voted for you.
Well, some of them did live in the constituency, and so because it's literally like a mile away from my parents where they live. So some of my cousins, I've got a massive family. My dad's one of 13, so 11 of them survived all the way through to adulthood. So I've got a whole army of cousins. So the first thing I had to negotiate was how I was going to get them to be my sort of delivery team, and how they were going to help me with my leaflet delivery. Because of course, most of them were dyed in the wool Labour. None of them were Conservative. But, I kind of persuaded them, blood's thicker than water. They didn't have to vote, but they did have to deliver, or they could do one or the other. And I never forget, actually, that they were fantastic. I got them, they said they wouldn't wear a rosette, they wouldn't wear anything. So I've got these sweatshirts made, which were blue, and said the woman's place is in the House of Commons, and then on the back it said vote Gillian Keegan. Well, they'd all wear those, so they were going around wearing these sweatshirts, delivering leaflets for me, and my cousins who lived in the area, what they agreed in the end is to help me out. They couldn't bring themselves to vote Conservative, even though it was me, but to help me out, they'd vote Green. So that I might have a chance of coming second. So that was the family compromise. But there's a picture on my Twitter. I don't think anyone's really noticed it, but it's me and a couple of my cousins. And I'd said to them one Saturday, we're going to go out, we're going to deliver a load of leaflets like around the area that a couple of them lived in, and they turned up, and two of them turned up and they had rollers in their hair. And I don't know how much you know about a night out in Liverpool, but you'll find on the streets of Liverpool on a Saturday, a lot of girls will go out with a full head of rollers, and it's kind of like a sign, like I've got something interesting to do. It's they have a full face of makeup on as well. But anyway, so they turned up in their rollers, and they literally were knocking on doors with their rollers in, asking whether people would vote for me. So I'm not surprised I didn't do better.
I can remember why we had that conversation, because I think we were talking about it. It was, I think, probably at the time of maybe just after the 2019 election, and this phenomenon of people in the north of England predominantly voting Conservative. And I was saying, well, no, they didn't vote Conservative. They voted for Boris Johnson. Which, of course, on Merseyside is maybe slightly different. But that phenomenon of people who had voted Labour all their lives, couldn't stand Corbyn, they wanted to get Brexit done, and they thought Boris was the guy to do it. And in a way, that's going to be the key to the next election, isn't it? To try and keep those people vote, because once you voted Conservative once, I guess it's probably easier to do it a second time. You can justify it to yourself. The challenge is to keep them on side, and that's, I guess, part of your job as well in what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. What he did is he listened to them and he respected them. And he respected their views and he respected their vote. And now that's in my DNA. I respect my family. I respect people who've got a different view, a different political view, but I deeply respect them. And, if you grow up in an area like that, anywhere actually, where you grow up with a lot of working class people, then I'm very proud of my background. I'm very proud of the people, and I'm very proud of how much they can achieve as well. The aspiration of the working class is something that is absolutely there, and we really do need to deliver on that, but we also need to tap into that, because I've always believed that a lot of what the Conservative Party stands for and what we want to achieve, it is going to be the right thing for helping people in places like Knowsley and helping people where I grew up and where I come from. It is about helping people to get the skills. That's why I'm so passionate about this job, about apprenticeships and skills. It really is the key and that can come at any time in life, at any age, at any stage. I left a Knowsley Comprehensive School. 92% of the kids left without the 4 O levels or whatever they're supposed to have to get on to the next stage of their life. 92%. When you grow up in that environment, you know that those 92% are as capable as anybody. They just don't have that qualification, that bit of paper. So you need to find other ways to help people to succeed later in their life, at different stages in their life, and of course help them to go to a better school as well if they're still at that stage. These are the things that the levelling up's all about, and these are the things that we're definitely going to have to deliver on. And if we can deliver on things like apprenticeships, and lots of kids could get them, and lots of kids could use them as a way to get on in life, and that was what we did and how we changed people's lives, then we've got a good chance, I hope, of people giving us another shot.
I was trying to remember when I first came across you, and I looked back on my text, and I've now worked it out. Do you remember this?
I am forthright, Iain.
I texted you on the 24th of June 2019, and I said, I've just been played your interview on Politics Live where you said I didn't hold Boris to account on Saturday. I'd love to understand how you come to that conclusion. It's not one that anyone else has come to, including all the country's top political interviewers. I'm genuinely puzzled. And this, just to explain the context, this was after the leadership hustings in Birmingham, the night after his, shall we say, contretemps with Carrie, which made all of the papers. And it was, I have to say, it was something that I was not looking forward to doing. And anyway, you sent me a very long reply explaining yourself, and then you were about to come on my programme, I think on the following Wednesday on Cross Question. And I remember at the time thinking, I'm going to give her what she deserves for that comment. But of course, we got like a house on fire, so I didn't have a go. But isn't it funny how sometimes little remarks like that you immediately take exception to can actually introduce you to someone, and then you get a completely different view of them?
Well, I actually find if you meet someone and talk to them, you'd probably get a better view than if you just listen to them on an interview or something. You know, I actually didn't mean it to be sort of offensive in any way either. I just thought, and it wasn't really a reflection on you. It was more a reflection on Boris's ability to sort of slip away from the question, which is a key skill, right? He does it very well. And it was about the leadership contest and stuff like that. So I just basically said, what I'd observed, which was a journalist master with another journalist master. It was like a duel kind of thing, and trying to pin him down. It
was. I mean, he is a nightmare to interview, and I've interviewed him a lot over the years because he never looks you in the eye. He'll look anywhere in the room but at you, so it's quite difficult to interrupt him. And he'll start on a monologue, which is very difficult to interrupt. And on this occasion, I think I asked him 5 times to explain himself over what had happened the previous day. He started talking about red buses. And after 5 times, it was quite clear he was not going to go there. And I thought, well, I could continue this for the next half an hour, but I'm not going to get any further. So sometimes you just have to let people who are watching or listening make up their own minds as to why a politician isn't answering a question. And that was one of them, I think. I went as far as I thought was reasonable to go. I'd already got the audience booing me, which made me inwardly laugh. But I thought, well, if he's not willing to go there, they can judge whether they still want to vote for him as party leader. And of course they did.
Yeah, and to be honest, people are entitled to their private life, right? It was actually, but it is a lesson, right? You say things and people take offence. It's a good lesson because the thing that is different about being a politician, I could have views before and not many people would hear them and not many people would feel offended by them. Now, if you say something, obviously you don't go on Twitter because people are just ready to be offended anyway. They've already written what they want to say before you've spoken in many cases. But it is possible that you when you're talking, people can take offence at what you say, and that's actually it does make you feel uncomfortable because I honestly I go out of my way to not offend people. I think that's also, growing up as a Conservative in Knowsley, I didn't go about sort of trying to indoctrinate, tell everybody my opinions and try and change their minds. I had to always understand where they were coming from, and I do respect. I genuinely do respect other people's views. But I looked at that as well. I thought it was quite funny. But then we got on, and then we did Any Questions, I think, together as well,
we did,
in Liverpool.
We? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was my first time, and again, I was very nervous about doing it because, I love my home city. I love the people of my home city, but they hate Conservative MPs, and that's kind of hard to reconcile. But actually, as it turned out, it was okay, actually. And I think people need to see people, actually. It didn't used to happen that people saw the political party before the person. I think we need to get back to where people see people first.
And I remember that now because it's quite an interesting audience. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a typical Liverpool audience. It wasn't that hostile. and whenever I'm in a situation like that where I think, well, the audience is going to be against me from the start because they see me as either a Conservative or somebody on the right. I remember doing Any Questions at a Newcastle working men's club many years ago, and they booed me before I'd said a word. And of course, then I did the wrong thing because I thought, well, sod that for a game of soldiers. So I became much more right-wing than I really am, just to wind them up. But of course, what you've got to remember is it's the audience at home that you're speaking to, not the audience in the room. But I thought on that occasion in Liverpool, you did exactly what I normally do. You got them on side right from the start by making them laugh in the warm-up question. And if they can see that you're a human being and have a sense of humour, it's quite difficult to hate somebody who displays a sense of humour and can make you laugh. And it was actually a really good panel that day, I thought.
It was a good panel, and they did respond, and I think what they got as well was that I'd grown up literally a few miles from where we were sat. I'd left school at 16. I'd gone to the normal comprehensive school. I'd worked my way up in life. They kind of could see all of that, and they could get that about me just from me talking about the car factory. They all knew the car factory that I worked in. I knew as soon as I said Delco, they all knew it. They were all nodding in the audience. So that was helpful, I think. And that's actually another thing that's helpful about having a long experience before you go into politics. The connection points that you have are really broad. So, whether it's somewhere I've worked or somebody I know, you just have so many connection points that usually when you're talking to someone, you can find something that you've got in common, something you can use to build a relationship, or something that you can, use to build a positive relationship instead of focusing on the things you disagree with each other on, or you may have a different view on. I think the variety of connection points is what comes with, I guess, being old or older.
You have got yourself into a bit of trouble on one or two occasions, though, haven't you, on these programmes? On Question Time, I think, not that long ago, you got hauled over the coals for saying something that maybe you shouldn't have, or you didn't know the answer to a question and you said so, which I always think is a good thing in politics. But you've got quite a lot of negative comment from the opposition on that, obviously.
It was actually I think what you're referring to, by the way, you could be referring to any interview if you look at Twitter afterwards. But I think the one you might be referring to is when I didn't know the rules. They just changed. It was actually the first time I'd done the morning round, and they just changed the rules at midnight the night before about how many people could socialise in what way in the northeast of England. And, effectively they were like, and there was some distinction, and I had actually read a lot of these rules, but there was some distinction about whether you could sit on a picnic table outside or a picnic blanket. And someone was pointing out of how ridiculous it was that, in one place you could sit with 6 people on a picnic blanket, but you couldn't sit at a table that was a picnic table. So it was getting to the point where all the mayors and all the individual people were coming up with their own rules. So they said to me, how many people can sit outside, a pub in Gateshead or whatever it is, and can they sit on a blanket or a table? And I honestly didn't know. I could have had a guess at it because I half knew one of them was Liverpool, could sit on a picnic blanket, the other was, couldn't on a table. But I didn't want to be misleading, and I said, I don't know. And it was quite strange because they said, how can you not know? And I thought, how can I not know? I'm the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills. I've come on to talk about skills, and I'm at the Chichester MP, and you're talking about, some deep detail of a rule in the North East that changed at midnight last night. How can I not know that? That's why I don't know. But they really did, and it was funny because I thought it was the right thing to do. Say, I'm sorry, I don't know, and I don't want to mislead people. But you can go on there's many people who do know. Go on the local websites, etc. I thought that was the right thing to do, but it wasn't. It became the story because then everyone said, junior minister doesn't know this, and junior minister hauled over the coals and doesn't know this, and I thought it was astonishing. Then, I was on Gogglebox. I was on the news quiz. Which junior minister doesn't know this?
You've made it when you're on Gogglebox.
I didn't see it actually. It was my personal trainer. I have a personal trainer, and he came and he said, "You were on Gogglebox last night." I'm like, "Oh, John, you're joking." So and all because I didn't know. And then people would text me saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry for you," and I'm thinking, what do you do when you don't know? First of all, how can you ever expect to know everything? I don't know. I mean, I read an awful lot, and I do retain quite a lot of knowledge, but I don't know everything. There's so much I don't know, that, it's impossible. It's like just being set up to fail in a way. And I think we do have to figure out how we're going to deal with this, because there's been a massive change in the trying to get the politicians gotchas, and then that becomes the story for the day.
Well, I had somebody, I think it was a tweet last night on my radio show, because we were talking about apprenticeships, and somebody tweeted, you really need to do your research and not present a show when you don't understand the subject. And I just said, well, it'd be a bloody short show if I only did shows on subjects I really knew an awful lot about. And I mean, you can't know everything. You can know a little about a lot, but there are only ever going to be certain subjects where you think, yeah, I am actually a genuine expert on that. And I defy anybody to know everything about everything.
Yeah, I God, I left a nosy comprehensive school at 16. I dropped history at 14. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many things I don't know. I Google all the time. What's that? I Google. Oh, now I know. I think the only thing you can ever do is be thirsty for knowledge, and be curious about other people, and be curious about, learning more. To know everything. No, but it has become, when you go on the media now, they will try and get you on a detail. They'll try and get you onto some nuance. On Question Time, there was another one about the furlough scheme, where I couldn't work out why Andy Burnham was trying to say that everybody in Bolton hadn't been able to furlough their staff, and I said, but they have, and they could, and it turned out that I was completely right. But the way that they were asking the questions made it look as though I didn't, But I was genuinely puzzled, because I was thinking, surely we'd have heard about it if everyone in Bolton couldn't have furloughed their staff, But maybe sometimes I'm a bit too literal.
The other time that I think you got some unfortunate headlines was when you were on holiday last year. Did that bemuse you as well, or could you understand the criticism? Because it was when the A-level results were coming out. You were a Department of Education Minister, not responsible for A-levels and GCSEs, but still an Education Minister, and you got hauled through the papers for that.
I did. So, what had happened is there's always a minister on duty through every recess, and so obviously Nick Gibbs is the minister responsible for A levels and GCSEs. So we took it in turns when we were all on duty. So I was on duty the first just under 2 weeks, 12 days. So I did the first bit. Then he did the second bit, which was the A-level bit, and then the other ministers did their bit as well. And that was the arrangement. Now, obviously I knew it was going to be quite a busy time, and there was lots of things that potentially could be going on. So, I got special permission to take my government PC to my house in France. I have a house in France. It's got better Wi-Fi than any of the other places I'm normally in. I took my PC, I set it all up, and I was on holiday with my husband and a friend and my eldest stepson. And that's what we did. We walked in the morning. We did some work. I chaired the VTQ task force every morning from there. But of course, they never let facts get in the way of the argument. Because I'd put some pictures on Instagram, which in itself was, a lot of people like, she's so stupid. Why would you put pictures on Instagram? And I had thought about this because I've been on Instagram since way before I was a politician. And you have this dilemma, do you pretend you're not on holiday as a politician? Mm. Politicians aren't supposed to have holidays, not even supposed to have a life, right? And I thought about it, and I thought, you've got two options, right? And this wasn't in relation to that particular holiday. This was when I first became an MP. Either just be yourself and be where you are, or the alternative is you don't post anything for 2 weeks. Well, or you put these mock posts of things you've done in the past and pretend you're doing them instead of going on holiday. I'm not ashamed to go on holiday, and I've always worked on holiday as well. So, I was prepared. I was doing the work. But of course, I've nothing to do with A levels or GCSEs either. But none of those facts got in the way of the argument. And I was quite surprised by it. I guess it was August. There was not much going on as well. I suppose that's in the journalist's defence. But I must say that to find yourself splashed over 5 pages of a paper because you went on holiday, it was a lesson, right? It was a lesson. And I guess on one level, my mum she's very pragmatic. She's fantastic, my mum. She phoned up and said, look, this will all blow over. But to be honest, I went to church today and everyone said you look fantastic. So I wouldn't worry about it. I think having your heavily filtered, carefully chosen Instagram pictures being the ones that are splashed all over the Daily Mail, I suppose there is a God from that perspective. It's going to happen. At least it's those photos. But then what happened after that is that there was I think it was a journalist or somebody went to Courchevel, went to the place where we have our chalet, and literally you could go to this. It's the original small town of the village of Courchevel, not the chichi one at the top. And you could literally go to this place and say, où est les Anglais, and they would point to our house. There's very few English that have house there. This journalist went and took a picture of a completely different house, of my neighbour's house, and literally could have. So they went to all the effort to go there, and they could have easily found us because everyone knows us. So it was quite astonishing that they sent somebody to France as well, or maybe that person just happened to be in France, but it was a lesson. I guess it was a slow news day.
Now, I've been told to ask you about a holiday you went on with John Bercow.
Oh yeah. This was when John Bercow's a very good friend of my husband's, and they met. Actually, they didn't go to university together or anything like that, but they're both politically obsessed enough to both have had the same thought independently, which was that they were going to basically stop the march of socialism, and they were going to stop it in Lambeth. So they basically both moved to Lambeth and tried to become Lambeth councillors, Conservative councillors at the same time, and that's how they met in their early 20s. So they're very good friends from a long time ago. And it was between, I think he'd been going out with Sally, but then they'd kind of split up, but it was before he married her. So he was single, and he wasn't really doing anything. And I think it was like over the Christmas or New Year or something, and we were going out skiing. So he came along with us, and you'd kind of sort of, he'd skied once before, I think. And, have you got your stuff? Have you got, we'll hire the boots when you get there, all the checklist. And we're sat on the plane, and he said, I'm really looking forward to this. There's only one thing, I can't go on any chairlifts. I'm absolutely terrified. So I said to him, how are you going to enjoy the skiing without that? He said, well, those things that sort of drag you up the snow. I said, they don't have them anymore. You're talking 20 years ago, those sort of...
Do they not do those anymore?
Oh, I mean, 1 or 2 in the nursery sleds.
Because, they were my nightmare. The first time I ever went skiing in Austria, I think it was, I was teaching in Germany in my 6th form class. We're going on a weekend, so they still come along, so I did. And, because I'm quite tall and they were all quite short... I just kept falling off them, and it got to 4:00, and I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to get out of here because I can't go up these bloody lifts. But I did in the end. But it was nearly dark by the time I actually got up.
Well, he probably had the opposite problem, right? You're really tall and he's not really tall, so maybe the pommel lifts, maybe they suited him. But they've got rid of most of them. I mean, you'll find the occasional one, and maybe in a more old-fashioned resort they'll have them. But anyway, where we were going, I think they had one in the whole resort, and it was just all chairlifts. And he literally, I mean, to talk about not thinking things through. He was planning on going on a weeks to 10 days skiing holiday where everything was perfect apart from the fact he wouldn't go on a chairlift. So and actually, to be honest, I took him and Michael skiing because I was the better skier of the 3 of us, which I must say was not difficult. But I took them skiing, and I actually accidentally took them down, let's say, a rather challenging black run, and pretended all the way down that it was a blue. It was quite dark, but
you could have changed the whole future of the speakership of the House of Commons by that decision.
I could have done. I think I changed his decision never to ski again. I don't think he's been since.
When you became an MP and he was Speaker, obviously you had a pre-existing friendship. I mean, what did you make of him, his behaviour as Speaker?
Well, when I first became an MP, I found it quite comforting that, you know, what everybody else saw as the big scary guy at the end of the chamber that, you know, has basically got your future in his hands in terms of the ability to speak, etc. The fact that he was I saw him as a sort of helpful, friendly face actually did soothe my nerves a little bit in my. I mean,
you'd seen him face down in the snow, so there was no intimidation there, was there?
Exactly, yeah, and you know, he was very encouraging of me on my political journey, but although I couldn't use him on my application form because, you know, by then he'd fallen out with half the Conservative Party. I thought, God, that'll be the kiss of death if I say that. So I didn't use him as a reference or anything on my application form. But, you know, he to me, it was good to see a friendly face. And certainly, you know, the nerve-wracking moments like your maiden speech and all of that, I was really glad, you know, that I knew him because it made it slightly less scary. Obviously, as the Parliament went on, well, that Parliament was, I think, just the most unbelievable. It was like the maddest Parliament ever. Like everything happened. Every sort of political event happened in that Parliament, and then ones that had never happened before. So it was incredibly difficult. And obviously, you know, many people got themselves on different sides of that debate, very, very different sides of that debate. But, you know, I used to go into the tea room and I'd sit down and, you know, lots of Conservative MPs would be bad-mouthing John and, you know, how terrible he was for whatever he'd done, you know, that they disagreed with that day. And then they'd suddenly, one or two would remember that I knew him and they'd look and say, oh, you know, but you're friends. I said, look, you know, don't worry about it. I said, to be honest, I think we should thank John because pretty much the only thing that every Conservative MP agrees on in this tea room is the fact you all don't like John Bercow. So he's like a massive unifying figure. Let's just focus on that, you know, be positive. Because, you know, of course, they had very different views on Brexit. You had the ERG down to the, you know, the One Nation. You had, you know, people leaving the party. I mean, literally, they were sitting on different tables in different camps, but they all agreed on one thing. They didn't like John. So that was, you know, it was incredibly difficult. And it was probably difficult for him as well because he is a Conservative to his boots.
Is he really? I mean, he always. I was at university at the same time as him. That was when I first knew him, and he was incredibly right wing at that point. But I think the general consensus is that he's moved away from the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I don't know if he's still a member, but I know he's a Conservative for sure. I think he's probably gone from the right wing to the more normal part of the party, which is where I am. So, you know, the sort of and a lot of them go on that journey as well. A lot of student politics is something that I completely passed me by in life, something for which I'm truly thankful. But it did pass me by. But it does seem to have created people who, you know, did have sort of more right-wing views and, you know, kind of a bit more ideology than perhaps I have ever had.
No, I think that is true. And the labels of left and right nowadays, they don't apply in the same way that they did when he and I were at university in the 1980s. And there was very factional politics in the Conservative Students' Organisation. Then you were either a libertarian or you were a wet. And I was kind of something in between, but because I didn't belong to either faction, they viewed me with sort of slight perplexion. What's the word? They were rather perplexed by me because I wouldn't conform to either being an ultra-libertarian, i.e. complete Thatcherite, although actually Thatcherism had nothing to do with libertarianism at all, I always thought, or being on the sort of Heathite wing, whereas nowadays you can be as dry as dust from an economic point of view, but you can be very socially liberal and still class yourself as a Conservative.
Yeah, and all of those labels, that's when I normally reach for Google, right? Because I've never described myself or thought of myself or even thought of people in that way. And it's something very distinct to student politics, actually on the left and on the right.
Yeah.
And I think you've just got to realise that for the rest of the world, it's a bit weird. And, we just don't think of people like that. And I'm just super pragmatic. And people do try to fit you in a box. I've been asked so many times of which wing I am, and I remember being in one discussion, and they were talking about the sounds and the unsounds, and I had no clue what they were on about. At first I thought I did follow it because everybody in Liverpool says sound, everything's sound, and then I realised that's not what they were saying, and I couldn't follow what they were on about.
In a conservative, when you're talking about it from a conservative point of view, it's not sound, it's sound.
Sound like
yeah, quite.
I couldn't but this is I guess this, whilst I was busy getting all that business experience and working out how to introduce just in time and how to keep the car factory going, not single-handedly, but the teams that I was part of, whilst I was doing all that, this debate was happening unbeknownst to me. That's the truth of it. I mean, we did talk about politics a lot, but it came to light in the way that, like, my granddad was a miner, and he had very strong views on the miners' strike, and so we talked about it from that perspective. So it was always from a perspective of real things that were happening, as opposed to any of the ideology, I suppose, that surrounded the party. And that's why I do enjoy now. I feel like I've missed something, so I read a lot of political biographies just to try and sort of catch up with what people were thinking then. And and it has, people still define themselves by something that happened 30 or 40 years ago. That to me is a bit odd, to be honest. If you look at where we are today, the global pandemic, we've responded to that in a way that doesn't fit any ideology. We've just done what we have to do. But, if you talk about state spending, big state intervention, and then a global pandemic comes and sweeps all of that ideology into something that's pragmatic, something you have to do. And that's how I sort of roll in life, I guess.
What do you do? I mean, your husband's clearly very political as well, but what do you do outside politics when you actually do have time to relax?
Well, we do a lot of political stuff. We also do a lot of, we've got a lot of friends from all over the world, really. We've both lived and worked in many different countries. So, we do that. I speak Spanish. I lived in Spain for 8 years. We ski. We do loads of walks. Our favourite thing to do, actually, is long country walks to a pub, and then have a pub lunch. We see family and friends, obviously, lots. But we don't do anything remarkable. We talk about politics a lot because I'm catching up in a way, to be honest. I mean, he knows a lot of more history of politics. I'm looking at his books now. He's probably got a bookcase that's probably very similar to your own. We do talk about politics a lot, and we talk about. But we have lots of different interests. One of our eldest, his eldest son, my eldest stepson, is just producing his first film. So that's been a big topic of discussion over the last few months about. I mean, he's done a remarkable job, actually, of identifying a story and from nowhere really building up the whole thing and getting it financed. So we've been talking a lot about that. That's a whole new world for us. So we've had to sort of learn how it works, how you invest in films, and how you protect your rights and stuff like that. So we do what normal things, really. We don't have any great sort of interests. We just basically do things that are fun. Skiing, bit of sailing, that's on our list of things to do. Me being the MP for Chichester, I feel like I
guess you have to, really, don't you?
I do, and there's a whole host of retired admirals and people who want to teach me. And my husband's actually doing he's studying war studies at a master's at King's at the moment, so that's also sending him off in the direction of naval history as well. So we do spend a lot of time sort of that's part of the history of the area. So that's something but it changes. A couple of years ago it would have been a lot of discussion about Brexit, a lot of discussion about international trade, etc.
kind of forget about Brexit now a bit, don't you? But,
it's been overtaken, hasn't it? It's been sort of subsumed in a way by the pandemic. What
ambition do you have?
It's something that I don't know. I'm ambition to survive is normally my ambition in life. Not to cock it up is normally my mantra. Whatever you do. But in terms of ambition, I've always just gone the next step as far as I go. I wouldn't say I'm a super confident, super ambitious. I've taken every step at a time. The first sort of big boost was passing 10 O levels, and that was the first time I thought, oh, maybe you've got, half a brain. And then, started the apprenticeship and continued with the degree. And I went back to London Business School when I was 42 because the world had changed, digital data, and I just felt like I needed to go back and get, an upgrade. I'm always kind of learning, and I like to do different things, but I don't have an ambition which is, I want to be this or I want to be someone. I have an ambition to hopefully, I would love the whole of the country to have access to really high quality apprenticeships in many different professions, and to be able to pick them up at any point and use them as a vehicle to learn new things and learn new skills. That would be an ambition that I would have. I'd love to be able to say, I was part of meaning that young kids leaving a comprehensive school in Knowsley today just have so much more options that are accessible to them, that'll enable them to get on and have a decent life. And that would be a fantastic thing to do. But I just find myself in places, I randomly ended up in Tokyo, randomly ended up in Madrid, and then randomly ended up in the House of Commons. That's not somebody who's sort of sat there with a grand plan.
But could you randomly end up being leader of the party?
That would be very random.
Well, I asked the question because I think there's nothing wrong with anybody saying, well, of course I have an ambition, and if the circumstances arose, of course I'd love to be Prime Minister. Andy Burnham got into trouble this week for saying that he would like to be leader of the Labour Party at some point in the future, and sort of people say, oh, shock horror, how could he say that? Well, why not?
And I think... I was on Question Time with Andy Burnham, and it was I thought it was quite clear that he would love to come back into politics. I think so.
Well, he would say he still is in politics, but
into the House of Commons bit of it, I suppose. But no, first of all, I don't. In terms of leadership, leaders need followers. That's what defines a leader. I think you've got to want it. I think you've got to really, really want it. I look at aspects of, the Prime Minister's job, or even some of the Secretary of States, and think, God, they don't get a moment's peace. They've got security guards. They've got people following them all the time. Their time's not their own. So I think there's a lot. You have to want it really badly. It doesn't happen accidentally, and most of the things that have happened in my life have happened accidentally.
So you're not there with your Michael Heseltine envelope saying, well, in 2025 I want to be doing this, in 2027 I want to be here. You're effectively going to take what comes your way.
Yep, and try my very best to do the very best I can in whatever situation I'm in. That's all I've ever done. You mentioned about at the beginning about taking over from Andrew Tyree. When I first met him, the guy he's just fantastic. He's got the brain the size of a planet. He's well loved. He's forensic in his detail. He's very smart politically. And when I first met him, I was a bit overawed, and he was brilliant actually. He's become a mentor, but he just sat down with me and helped me write my first leaflet. And that was only 5.5 years ago. So, that's when I sat down with him, started to think about, and that was to be a councillor, by the way. That was to be a Conservative councillor. So the journey's already been relatively quick, just because of circumstances, I guess, with Brexit, with the elections, the sort of snap elections happening, etc. But no, I don't ever sit there and think that. I do want to learn to. I want my Spanish to be better. I want to learn to speak French. I'd like to, my skiing to be better. So I have those kind of ambitions. Always want to be thinner. Not to age terribly. That would be an ambition, but
vanity, all is vanity.
It's terrible when people suddenly start taking your photograph when you're 52. That's the only time I think, God, I wish I'd have done this earlier.
Well, at least you've still got your hair. That's the main thing.
Which, by the way, in my family, most people have alopecia, and I've had alopecia in the past. So I lost my hair when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it, not all of it.
But I mean, that for a woman is almost one of the worst things that could happen. I imagine. I think I don't think I'm telling tales out of court here, but I think that happened to Nadine Dorris as well, a bit, and it must be terrible.
Well, I'm going to shock you now, because when it happened, I didn't notice. So my mum looked at me. I was about 13, and she looked at me and she said, "Have you been plucking your eyebrows?" I said, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about." And anyway, she said, "Go and look in the bathroom mirror." So I went to the bathroom mirror, and I had half my eyebrows and half my eyelashes missing. And then I started to sort of feel around, and then there was kind of a couple of patches. I don't know why I didn't notice. I wasn't really that. I wasn't vain or whatever at that time. I'd absolutely nothing to be vain about, but I didn't notice. But of course, then it happened, and it started. Bits started to fall out. And I was talking to actually my first boyfriend, like school childhood boyfriend. I was talking to him on a school reunion recently, and he said, "Do you remember you used to have those clips? You used to pull bits of your hair over and trying to clip it." And I'd forgotten all about it. I said, "Yeah, actually, now you mention it, I do
and then
remember it."
He said, "Yeah, I found that a real turn on."
You know what, this guy, it's so funny. I'm going to out him now. I got rid of him. He wasn't like a serious boyfriend, but I got rid of him because I saved up. I did a Saturday job, and I used to go to St John's Market in Liverpool, and I worked, and I did a Saturday job, and I saved up, and I bought him the Human League Dare LP.
Excellent LP.
Yeah, for his Christmas present, and he gave me an umbrella which was orange and brown, which didn't have the wrapper on, which I know was his sister's. And I just thought, you've got to be kidding. So I threw the umbrella back at him, took me humanly back, and that was the end of it. Anyway, we're all
and he said, "Don't you want me, baby?"
I'm like, "No, I just don't want your umbrella." Off you go.
Off you went back to your cocktail bar.
You know what? When we were out, we went out to a school reunion a couple of not last December before. He turned up with a massive umbrella. But it's so funny. But I mean, I'm still in touch with all my school friends. I love where I'm from. I love my friends. They're just, that's why you can never change. Because you've got them.
You're another one of these Liverpudlians who love the place so much they leave it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be averse to living in Liverpool. I would go back there. I mean, Mum and Dad still live there. I'd love to live there. I did when I was studying St Helens South and Wiston. I did entertain, when I was going around various areas thinking, if I won this, I could buy a house here and then I'd be, not far from Mum and Dad. And, I'd look at the nicest streets and stuff like that. So I did kind of entertain it.
And then you looked at the 20,000 majority.
Well, I knew there was zero chance. And actually, the places I was knocking on the door of probably where my vote was coming from, but not. Yeah, there was no chance. But I love where I come from. I would be back there if circumstances arose. I also love Chichester. I've got to be honest. I live in Petworth, and I represent Chichester. It is like paradise. You're driving through the South Downs National Park on the way to, a Roman city that's absolutely beautiful. And then, down to the seaside, I've got the sort of the blue flag beaches. I mean, it's a Goodwood racecourse. I mean, the place is Cowdray Park Polo. The place is just like, unbelievable. So I do love where I am and love where I live.
I have appeared at the theatre in Chichester.
Have you? I actually went for lunch with the Queen.
Did you? Well, you see, that beats me. I was doing a night with Anne Widdecombe.
Oh, were you really?
No,
Gosh.
Yes.
Well,
yes, there's no answer. There's no answer to that, is there?
No. There isn't. I've got an Anne Widdecombe story. So I
go on then. We've all got. I've got many.
I've got one. I met her once when she came down. So when I stood in St Helens, Esther McVey was still the MP for Wirral West. So I spent a lot of time in Wirral with Esther, and Anne came to help her. So it turned out Anne and I were. She spent a long time getting there. She lives miles away. She's
Dartmoor.
Dartmoor. She'd driven from Dartmoor to Wirral West. She arrives and she's got, the coat, the hat on. It was quite blustery weather. And we're going down, knocking on this sort of back-to-back street in the Wirral, and she's going on ahead of me, and I'm kind of just trying to keep up with her. And every door that opened, and she'd sort of fly, sort of move on and fly past. She can give out leaflets quicker than anybody. They would all be going, "Hey girl, is that the woman from Strictly? Is that her from Strictly?" And all the street was coming out to see. I said, "Anne, you're gonna have to slow down. They all want to see the woman from Strictly." So she was there sort of talking to her. Hat blew off. About 10 kids tried to rescue it for her. And then she walks into the pub, and everybody goes silent. She's a brilliant campaigner. I mean, she really is.
No, absolutely. I've got so many Anne Widdecombe stories, but people have heard them all before, so I won't repeat any of them here. You live in Petworth. I was supposed to appear at the Petworth Literary Festival last year, but obviously that got cancelled, so I did it by Zoom instead, which wasn't quite the same.
Well, you must. It's been going a couple of years, and it's absolutely brilliant. You must. When we can do it again, you must, and you can come and see.
I'd love to. Listen, we had better stop, because if I'm not careful, you're going to surpass Andrea Leadsom's 78 minutes. We're on 73 at the moment. So,
oh my goodness.
And she would not be pleased. So we will stop here, but thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And maybe in 5.5 years, you'll invite me into Downing Street and we can do it all over again.
I'll invite you wherever I am.
Diplomatically said. Thanks, Gillian. That's all
Ian.
for today. Join us again next week for another Iain Dale All Talk. You've been listening to a Global Original podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast.